Replacing the drive shaft is not as difficult as it seems. This is for the front all-wheel drive version. Only all-wheel drive has 2 drive shafts, and this is the front drive shaft. You're only required to have a T8 socket to remove these bolts right here that hold the shaft from the front. There are 8 T8 hex socket, 4 of them that you have to remove. Right here I'm showing you the socket T8. This is me already putting everything back together. I didn't record me removing the old one, but it's not hard, really ain't. You want to have a floor jack to jack up the transmission in order to remove 2 bolts from the transmission mount bushing, whatever, the skid plate that holds the transmission bushing. You only have to remove 2 of them in order to make space for the shaft to kind of fall down and you slide it out. You also need, it's a 10 or a 12 mil to remove those 2 bolts that I'll show in a bit, and the floor jack to jack up the tranny. So right here I'm finishing up putting up the bolts. Also, you might need to have your car on the air. If you have a lift or 2 floor jacks, lift up your car in order to be able to move the drive shaft to put the rest of the bolts on the other side. You can freely spin the drive shaft. So these are it right here. I'm pointing at the 2 bolts that I had removed, and now I'm putting them back together. And you want to make sure you do jack up your tranny. Oh, and also you have to remove the O2 sensor. So have an O2 sensor socket on hand, or if you want to use pliers somehow, better off just use O2 sensor socket. You want to remove it because then it's in the way of the drive shaft when you remove it. So now these lines as well, these metal lines, I'm not sure what kind of lines they are, fuel lines, air lines, I'm not sure, but you do want to loosen up the 2 bolts that hold them in order to make space when you remove the old drive shaft and slide in the new one. So remove 2 10s, they gotta be 10s, 2 10s, this one and the bottom one I showed, just to free up space, more space when the drive shaft is coming out. You can kind of move them around, but just be careful since they're metal lines. And now I'll put everything back together. O2 sensors back, the new drive shaft, and from the back it just slides out. Nothing, no bolts behind the drive in the back of the drive shaft. It'll just slide out the, I want to say the differential, the rear diff. Might be the rear diff, or it's part of the transmission. Actually, it's part of the transmission. But other than that, you want to then tighten everything back together. These 2 bolts right here that hold the cover for the transmission mount bushing. Tighten up your O2 sensor socket. Checking, double checking. You don't have to unplug it, just remove it. And I ended up using zip ties to tighten this because I lost the bolts. But whatever works. And then make sure all those 4 bolts, the T8 bolts, are bolted back together. So now we're at a 2-hour job, honestly.